In this episode, I am being joined by Tony DiLorenzo. Tony is one of the hosts of the One Extraordinary Marriage Show, the #1 marriage podcast on iTunes. Tony and his wife, Alisa, have been helping couples create extraordinary marriages for 12 years and counting. In this episode, Tony is going to talk about the 6 pillars of intimacy, which are essential tools to help keep a marriage rock solid, and how Tony and his wife, Alisa, have managed to overcome the common struggles and dilemmas most couples face so that they could keep their relationship on fire. And Tony is going to give you the steps so that you can do the same. My conversation with Tony DiLorenzo starts right now. Hello, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Dads Making a Difference podcast. I'm Cam Hall. I am your host, and I am really looking forward to this conversation with Tony DiLorenzo. Tony is co-host of the top marriage podcast on iTunes alongside his wife, Alisa, with their show, The One Extraordinary Marriage Show. Tony and his wife, Alisa, speak to a worldwide audience about sex, love, and commitment, and challenge every one of their listeners and members of their one community to make their relationships a priority. Their best-selling book, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy, has transformed countless marriages around the world because the framework is simple, practical, and powerful. By reading The 6 Pillars of Intimacy and listening to this conversation with Tony today, you'll be inspired to look at your marriage through a new lens and be encouraged by its common sense approach. I'm excited for this conversation today, so let's get into my conversation with Tony DiLorenzo. Tony, welcome to the DMD podcast. Pumped to have you, man.
Oh, it's awesome to be here, Cam. Thank you very much.
You know, we had an opportunity to speak a few weeks ago. I guess it's almost a month and a bit ago now.
Yeah.
And really to connect and just to get to know each other a little bit. And in that short conversation, I learned a lot about you and your passion. I learned the path that you and Alisa are on together, and how that path has been up and down. And right now you have, like I said in the intro, you have the top marriage podcast on iTunes, the One Extraordinary Marriage Show. And it hasn't always been that way. But, you know, doing some digging on you and in your background, and I've actually had the opportunity to hear you speak. And I don't know if you knew this. I heard you speak at a mastermind event once, and of an old mastermind I was part of. And, you know, I know you have some other things in your background that have helped shape you get to where you are today. Yeah. So why don't we start there? Why don't we start with how you got here? We'll get into, you know, One Extraordinary Marriage and the amazing book that you guys have out right now, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Tony DiLorenzo, great to meet all you guys and gals. Been married 26 years, or going on 26 years, I should say. I've known my beautiful wife, Alisa, for 28 years. We met in the summer of 1994. I was 21 when I met her, and amazing. She was 19. She turned 20 that a couple of weeks after we met her. A little fun fact about that summer I'll share. I don't know if I've shared this in many places, but Alisa was supposed to just be a summer fling. She was at the University of Colorado Boulder for 8 weeks for an internship. Yeah. And I was a student there, and I was a cook and a hasher at my fraternity house for the summer so I could get free room and board over the summer. And as a 21-year-old college student, man, that's a good gig. You got free room and board. And then I was the breakfast cook. So I made some money on top of my normal room and board. And I met her, and we were supposed to just have a summer fling. And about 2 weeks into this, it was her 20th birthday. And a buddy of mine was had an apartment. I remember calling him up. I'm like, hey man, it's Alisa's birthday. Would you be cool if we throw a kegger for her? If I throw a kegger for her? A kegger. I love it. So back in the day, and it was the first time we kissed. I remember being in my buddy's apartment. We were in his kitchen, and we locked eyes across his dining room table, very small, obviously, as a college apartment. And we locked eyes and we kissed for the very first time, probably June 20th, 1994.
Wow. Amazing.
So it's pretty amazing. And just thinking about that. So that's just a little fun fact for you.
That is a fun
you,
fact.
Cam.
Now, I don't know if I should ask this question to ruin such a sweet story, but first kiss before or after the keg stand at the kegger?
Oh yeah, never did cake stands. I just
Oh,
wasn't a
good.
cake stand type of guy. So I don't even, I'm sure it was a thing back then. I don't remember it. So it was definitely, there was a pitcher. I do remember a good pitcher of beer just sitting on the
Yeah.
kitchen table.
Yeah. And that was the preparation in case you got rejected, right? That's like,
Yeah.
I'm going for the first kiss. It doesn't work out. I'm turning around,
But-
I'm grabbing that and I'm walking out. Yeah.
But here it is. So Alisa and I, we started out our dating years as it was going to be a summer fling, and she knew well before I did that I was the one for her. But we fell madly in love, got married in 96. And in that time period prior to kids, I want to share because we waited 6 years before we had kids. And so we had some time. I was 23 when I got married and she was 22. So I didn't have my oldest until I was 29. And in that interim period, we worked a number of different places and did a number of different things. And one of my biggest accomplishments in that time period, and still to this day, was I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. I thru hiked the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. Wow. And that was 3 years into my marriage. It almost destroyed our marriage, but it's been one of the most influential parts of my marriage as well, and as a person. So
did you do that solo?
I did. I started out by myself at Campo, which is at the southern border here, just east of where I live in San Diego. I started by myself and ended up meeting some guys and gals along the way pretty quickly in the beginning. This is back in 2000, so it was really a smaller group. There's only about 300 of us who started, less than 150 of us finished that year. But yeah, through that southern section, you tend to meet a lot of people and hang out with a lot of people because there's only so much water. So everybody is sort of like at water stops and everybody's just sort of hopping each other. But it was truly an amazing experience. Yeah.
Really cool. And so, at that point in time, no kids, you do this trail. You said it almost destroyed your marriage. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it took me 138 days to complete it end to end, averages roughly about 20 miles a day. And, you get out there, and Alisa and I had been hiking and backpacking. That was our recreational intimacy back in the day. We did a lot of hiking and backpacking. And the summer prior, we had actually completed we actually ended up doing it in 3 days, a 3-day 40-mile trip called the Ray Lakes Loop out of Sequoia Kings Canyon. And I remember being on the Pacific Crest Trail looking at that. We were at the high point on Glen Pass. It's like 11,800 feet, somewhere around there. And I remember looking north, and I remember looking south, and I was like, Alisa, I'm going to hike this trail one day. And when it came around to doing the trail, I remember going, hey, do you want to do it with me? Because it'd be awesome. She's like, absolutely not. It's
Not
like,
a chance.
Not interested in, she's like, I'm cool 3-4 days. Nowhere near do I want to be out there for 138 days. So when you're out there, you got a lot of time to think, a lot of things to do. You get disconnected from society. Even back in the day when we didn't have phones like we do today, you just get disconnected, right? You get used to not hearing the sounds of cars, or not getting used to just the chirping of birds, and going to sleep when it gets dark and waking up when it gets light, and dealing with snow, wind, trail, just whatever you have to deal with. So coming back into society, we lived in Orange County, and I'm a pretty an extroverted, relational guy, and I got really reclusive and fearful, and it just caused a lot of tension. I didn't want to go back to work, and it just caused a lot of tension in our marriage. So I do remember one day, I actually at that point in time too got back into pornography because I was just I was just alone, and Alisa would leave all day, and I had nothing else to do, and I wouldn't even go outside really. But I do remember one lunch, she came back from work, and she worked not too far away, and I remember her just coming in, and she's like, we need to have a talk. I'm like, yeah, what's up? And she goes, and this is back in the day with phone books, she goes, I've been looking through the yellow pages for a divorce lawyer.
Oh wow.
And we are about to celebrate our 4th anniversary, and I was just like, what? Like, it was just a punch to the gut, like, what are you talking about? We're good. What's wrong? I don't understand. And we had a good heart to heart at that point in time. It'd been building for her.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. And so it's just a really good heart to heart, and just started working on, okay, I can get back out. What do I need to do? Where I don't want to go back to doing what I was doing before. I left that because I wanted something new. So it's just trying to find something different to walk into, and found a really cool place. I started working at the North Face retail, just to get that first introduction, but still sort of feeding that passion of being out in the outdoors and stuff.
Yeah, really cool. Now, you mentioned in there, I think it's an important point that, you found yourself being more reclusive after being away for some time, and how that isolation, being reclusive, not wanting to connect with people, led you into a path where you got back into something that was poisoning your relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned pornography, and guys are listening to this and they might be like, well, he just dropped the porn word in there really quick without some. So give us a little backstory on that. And you, in the book, Alisa brings this up, but I think it's important for you to share with our guys kind of the process that you went through there.
Yeah. I'm going to share the book real quick. So it's right there. 6 Pillars of Intimacy, #1 bestseller. She did an amazing job. It's with Tony. Our editor was so nice. She's like, this is, Alisa really wrote this, and we were going to do Tony, Alisa and Tony, or Tony and Alisa DiLorenzo. And editor's like, no, this isn't Alisa DiLorenzo with Tony DiLorenzo. I'm like, totally understand.
And it says very clearly what the with means, when it's Tony's thoughts, which I appreciated. I thought it was good.
Yeah. So I got introduced to pornography when I was 12 years old. I was a Boy Scout, and the building that we met at, a bunch of guys knew where there were some magazines in some bushes. And so that's where I got introduced as a 12-year-old. And so from 12 to, so when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, I was 27. So that's 15 years. There are definitely times when I was full on in it. And there are other times when I can remember just going without ever even looking at it, or briefly. And then other times just getting really deep into it. The beginning of our marriage was one of those points in times where I got back into pornography. I imagined marriage being so much different, and I started getting back viewing it, but then starting to get into even to chat rooms and things of that nature. And then on the trail, it sort of just dissipated. Like, there's no, what are you doing? Like, I had no time to even think about it. And even prior to that, in our marriage, we were sort of in a good spot. I really felt like we were in a good place. So there wasn't a lot of viewing of it. And then, like I said, on the trail, you'd end your day, you were so dang tired, you can keep your eyes open. I mean, you're just like, I just need to go to bed. And then your day, there's just so much having to get through and do. But coming back off that trail, I was just alone. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. And it was a way to just fill up time, because Alisa wasn't around either. And I don't think we were, if I can recall, we're going 22 years ago now.
Yeah.
I don't really remember having an abundant sexual intimacy in our marriage. Like, we would have sex, but it's not like it is today. I think I have some of the best sex with my wife than I've ever had in my entire marriage, especially over the last 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years. So it was just a lonely time, and it was a way to just fill up that time and get away from reality. And that's what it was for me. It was a way to get away from reality.
Wow. An escape.
An escapism.
I've heard that from other guys who've struggled with the same too. I think if you're a guy, I'm a guy sitting here and to say that I hadn't been exposed to it earlier on, and now it's so readily available. And in the back of my head right now, we're both dads, and we're both dads as sons. And it's so readily available. I'm just like, man, how important it is for us to address this issue with our sons and be transparent about it and talk about the draw of it and the hurt of it as well. And I appreciate you opening up and sharing a little bit about that with us.
Can I share a little bit around that with my boy? And
of course.
So what ended up happening is we had our oldest, and I remember he was a year old. We were living here in San Diego, and I remember being in our place. And at that point in time, my office and computer was in my garage. We had a 3-bedroom place. And I just put my computer out there. It was cool. On the other side of the wall was our living area and our living room. And I remember Alisa was in that area and like breastfeeding our boy. And I was about to look at some pornography again to escape, to just check out. I knew she was going to be occupied, so she wasn't going to come jumping in on me. And I remember about to start searching and I heard a voice that said, "It's finished." And I was like, whoa. I just sat there and I was like, what? And I just turned it off. And I remember walking into her and I just said, "Alisa, this is what I was about to do, but I go, it's finished. I'm done with this." And she and I had a really heart to heart. I remember there's tears on both sides and just the hurt and the pain that happened. So it was basically like, "Alisa, if I go towards it again, if I look at it again, I want you to know." She left for a week, about a week after she left for a week to go see her folks with our boy. And I went to pornography and I just felt this piece of like, no, I told her. And I had to literally just go, my word was I was going to let her know. So I picked up the phone. She was 2 or 3 hours ahead at that because she's on the East Coast and or Midwest. And I picked up the phone. I told her, and I just remember hearing her voice, and it just hit me for the first time, probably in such a way where I was just like, no, it's done. And I was just like, no, it's done. And I have not looked at pornography in 18 years. So it just was one of those moments where I tried so many different ways and different things. And I've heard so many guys do it. For me, it was just that point in time. It's done. And then I remember finding out my boy was watching it and looking at it. And I just went up to him. And one thing I've always continued to tell myself is like, that's somebody's mom. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's wife. And I'm objectifying her. And that is unacceptable. And that's what sometimes will just pop into me. And I'll just go, wow. And that's what I had to tell my son when I found out he was looking at some. And I just told him that. I'm like, think about this, man. You got a mom, you got a sister. That would you like that? And we had a really big heart-to-heart talk and had that discussion. So,
yeah. Wow. So, let's go back to the trip and, you're 4 or 5 years in your marriage, you waited until you had kids. Then you had kids later on in marriage, but in the book you speak about, and I've heard you speak on your podcast about, 11 years in, right, something changes, and it could be 2 years in, it could be 5 years in, it could be 11, 15, whatever it is. But tell us about the transition that happened in your marriage and how that kind of created a pathway to where you're at now.
Yeah. So we're 11 years into our marriage and we're looking at each other. We got a 5 and a 2-year-old at this point in time. And we don't have the greatest marriage at all. I mean, we're doing decent at best. I shared that we were looking at 3 different avenues to take, or 3 different trails to take. One was get a divorce now, because it's okay, but it's not great. We're not really doing anything. And if this is a way it's just going to keep going, then why are we even doing this? B was, hey, we'll make the best of it until the kids turn 18. And then we'll part ways then, but at least we'll have a united front. Or C, we're going to get radical. And we had been watching some friends of ours, their girls were playing like beach tennis. And after their segment on TV, we saw these 2 couples, and they had done, each of them, different ones, sex challenges. One, the wife gifted her husband 365 days of sex. The other couple, they did 101 days of sex. Wow. So I remember looking at this going, this is intriguing. I like this.
Oh yeah. Most guys would see that and be like, yeah, that sounds interesting.
This is cool. Like, I'm like, wow, my head, I'm sort of the visionary, and I sort of dream a little bit. And I'm like, oh, wow, this could be really cool. We're about to lead a small group study at our church around the book Intimacy Ignited. Talks all about the Song of Solomon. It's going to be an 8-week study. So in my head, I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, this is sort of cool. We're going to talk about this. And so I look at Alisa and I go, what if we do a 60-day sex challenge? And before I could even finish, Cam, she's just like, no. And just hops up, walks into the bathroom, gets ready, and like, because this was the evening, so she's like taking her time, getting ready to go to bed. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, well, maybe we can at least have sex tonight. You know what I mean? Where something will happen. She comes out with like this green face mask on, like this whole thing.
You weren't looking for the backup pitcher of beer at that point, were you? Like that rejection? No.
I was just like, you're kidding me. Yeah. And so I was just like, I don't know. And then the next day she had her, what she would say, her come to Jesus moment. She was doing laundry, and she heard a word that says, he's not asking you for, much. And she just, and it was something like, he's not asking for much. And if you're not willing to make your marriage a priority, it's over. Something to that extent. And so I came home from work that day, and she was like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, do what? Because I was already on to something new. I was like, I can't sit in this world, because if I sit in this world, I'm going to feel the pain, and I don't want to feel that pain right now. I don't want to be there. And so I was just like, do what? And she's like, let's do this 60-day sex challenge. And I'm like, oh, whoa. And I'm like, trying to reel it back in, like, oh crap, like, what am I doing? Like, what if I can't do this? What if something happens and this and that? And we laid out our ground rules for it, which was, she's on her period, no sex. If one of us is traveling, no sex. If one of us is sick, no sex. We ended up, over those 60 days, we completed 40 out of 60, but we learned so much more. It wasn't about the sex. That was the catalyst. That's what got us going. That's what made us, each of us, and our marriage a priority again. But it wasn't the only thing. And that's what finally reignited us to go, wow, there's so much more. And as they say, the rest is history. But it's been a journey since then, speaking to marriages through the One Extraordinary Marriage show, through all of our books, Alisa coaching, events that we do. But that was the catalyst, and we haven't stopped, because we really believe in, if we can impact one couple, if we can change one couple's lives, and it's been worth it.
That's amazing. A lot of guys get really uncomfortable when it comes to talking about sex in their relationship. And they hear the word intimacy and it scares them off. But often they're tying the two together, thinking that they're the same thing, right? That sex is intimacy, that intimacy is sex. And you have the book, The 6 Pillars of Intimacy. Sexual intimacy is part of it, and you've mentioned that. Yes. But what is intimacy beyond sex?
Yeah, great question. So intimacy, we've done that in our society, right? Just as what you said, intimacy is sex, sex is intimacy, and we've confused that. And it's not that. Intimacy is closeness and connection. That's what it is. That is what the word is. It's closeness and connection. And so as Alisa and I begin our journey and look at where we're at, where we're growing, and have grown the One Family to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of folks around the world, we began to study marriages and read and learn and listen and hear. And we would keep hearing this. People just go, I want more intimacy. And I'm going, well, what does that mean to you? And they're like, well, I want more sex. And I'm going, well, you can't have sex 24/7. And intimacy is closeness and connection. So you want closeness and connection in your sexual intimacy. Is that what you're telling me? Yeah. How do I do that? I'm like, okay. And so we just began to hear this, and just learning from people and ourselves, we found, and we drilled it down to, like, these are the 6 areas. These are the 6 pillars that really matter for a marriage to have that strong foundation, so that they can strengthen themselves and have the extraordinary marriage they desire.
Yeah. An extraordinary marriage. When you hear that, it sounds a bit intimidating. It sounds a bit idealistic. Oh yes, this extraordinary marriage. Look at Tony and Alisa. They're perfect. And all you need to know is, when you read the book and when you listen to the One Extraordinary Marriage podcast, Tony and Alisa are not claiming to be perfect. They are far from it. I love your honesty and your transparency the two of you have. We were talking about your podcast on our last call, and you mentioned, he's like, yeah, people say it's like sitting at your dining room table hearing you speak. And it really is, right? And so if you're listening to this right now and you're like, well, yeah, sure, it worked for Tony and Alisa, but it takes work. Intimacy takes work. An extraordinary marriage takes work. So if someone's listening to this right now, like, yeah, like we could use a jump start or a refresh, or, maybe that you said come to Jesus moment where it's a shift. Like, where do they start?
I would say pick up the book, and
Yeah.
you can get that at sixpillarsofintimacy.com. It's on Amazon. Pick it up in whatever format. Start there, because that's the foundation. Once you understand what the 6 pillars of intimacy are and which ones have cracks and which ones are strong, then you have the framework for your marriage. And that was, for me, Cam, was the big thing, because it was always so tough when I would talk to a husband who would come up to me and they would be just in a place of fret and frustration, and like, they're all over the place. They're like, well, this is going on, this is going on, this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, whoa. Let's slow down here, because I get it. There's a lot of things that can happen in life. I do not proclaim, nor does Alisa and I proclaim to be perfect. We're not.
Right.
We stub our toes, we skin our knees, we can still get mad at each other, we still have emotions. We have kids coming in and out, doing things that, like, Alisa's okay with, that I'm not okay with, that I'm okay with, that she's not okay with, that causes tension between us. And yet when I can look at my pillars and I can go, why did I just go there? What just happened? Why did I just blow up at Alisa? What? Because she just spent $500 on a pair of shoes? Well, there's a crack in my financial intimacy pillar. What is it? Is it that we don't have any money, or is that I have some root issue that I need to address that I haven't addressed yet? But I can call it out, and I can say, oh, that's my financial intimacy pillar. There's a crack in it. Where do I need to strengthen it? Where do we as a couple need to strengthen it? Because the 6 pillars of intimacy is about being, and the framework is about being on the same team. We want couples to be on the same team. This isn't a book that's going to pitch you against your spouse. That's not what it's about. It's about you and your spouse getting on the same team together, looking at those, and how do we strengthen each and every one of them.
Yeah. And I want to bring to the attention of the people listening to this, men or women, that, what I appreciated about the book when I read it, and it's outlined in it as well, is the word pillars is very intentionally chosen.
Yes.
Right. And it's not the 6 steps to an extraordinary marriage, which probably could have been under some copywriter somewhere who would have said, you should sell it this way. Right. You chose pillars, and Alisa chose pillars. Mm-hmm. Would you touch on that? I could say why, but why don't you touch on why?
Well, two main reasons. That there's structure to pillars, right? Mm-hmm. They hold up buildings. You see them on the Pantheon or the Colosseum. You see them in buildings here in the United States, in the South, or you'll see them on, at the Capitol. They represent, like, the foundation. They just represent so much of, like, strength. Yeah. And you look at it, and if you look at the Colosseum, think of the Roman Colosseum. How many thousands of years is it there? And those pillars are still standing. Right. The other thing is that they're beauty. Yeah. They add beauty to the structure. They're just not a post. Like, I'm looking at my gazebo out here, and I got some 4x4 beams, and they're holding up the top of my gazebo, but they're not really beautiful. They're 4x4 posts, but a pillar is beauty. And we really see that in marriage. There's beauty to it. There's this glory, this glorification in it, which represents that beauty of the pillar. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love it, because pillars come with that stability and that strength. It's just, I really appreciated reading the explanation in the book. Yeah. But it is a framework, and I love that. It's not the steps. It's not here's the how-to. It's here's a framework. Now work through it, and work through it together. Yeah. In that process of working through the 6 pillars, and we won't go through all the 6 pillars, but if you're listening, grab the book. It's a good read. It's a quick read, but it's very valuable. But in the book, you emphasize, and Alisa emphasizes, because we've already spoken how Alisa wrote it with Tony, but there's an emphasis on intentionality. Yeah. What does intentionality look like, and why is it so important in an extraordinary marriage?
Yeah, so there's 2 things that Alisa and I have said for many, many years. If you want to have the extraordinary marriage, you need to be intentional, and you need to take action. We have to be intentional, and we have to put down where we're going and where we're moving towards. And so when we're intentional, say if we're doing an episode around, let's just say we're doing an episode around sexual intimacy, right? And we're going to just talk about foreplay per se. how are we going to be intentional this week around that? One, we may have to start with our emotional intimacy pillar, right? We're going to have to talk about it. What does foreplay look like for you, for me? What do I like? What do you like? All right, honey, we got to get there in understanding that. And then moving down the steps of going, okay, well, physical intimacy, what touches do you enjoy? Physical intimacy, by the way, everybody, that's non-sexual touches. We make sure that that is broken up between physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, holding hands, kissing, cuddling, touching toes, whatever that is, that's your physical intimacy. Can it lead to sexual intimacy? Absolutely. But we want you to know that just holding hands and walking down the street, you're strengthening your marriage. That's huge. You're saying, hey, we're one. We're gonna hold hands. We're gonna hug. We're gonna kiss in your own way. And so I just think about those things and I go, okay, to be intentional means we're gonna have to step in these areas and we can't shy away from them. And we're gonna have to take action, because if I tell Alisa what I enjoy in foreplay and she tells me, then the next step is, hey, we're gonna actually have to put that into practice because we got to learn and we have to move forward.
Yeah. I love that communication you just said. When I let Alisa know that this is what I expect, and she lets me know what she's expect. At the time of recording this, your most recent episode on your podcast, you talked about one of the pitfalls that people will fall into, and that's unvoiced expectations.
Yeah.
And just as you were speaking about, that boundary between what physical intimacy and sexual intimacy is, and can it lead to sexual intimacy? Sure. But you have to be clear on those expectations. There's other pitfalls that, men and women can fall into when they're building an extraordinary marriage. What would those be?
I think one, those unvoiced expectations is a huge one. Just what expectations do we have? Have we actually shared that with our spouse? Do they know what the bar is? Do we know what the bar, where we're even headed? If I look at it when it comes to like our emotional intimacy, pitfalls there, that's your closeness. That's where you get close and connected via your verbal, nonverbal communication. I think a lot of pitfalls there, we don't realize how much our nonverbal communication speaks to our spouse. It really just speaks volumes at times. You know what I mean? When even that heavy sigh, like, really? Like, you don't even have to say the really part. You just like,
yeah.
And your spouse is like, what? Oh, nothing.
What was that
like,
about?
no, what was that about? I know it because I do it. We have to address it even in our own lives. Yeah. So that's a big pitfall, I think, there. Physical intimacy, I think it's just not understanding what really works for couples. I think in our social media hyped up world of everything visual, people look at others and try to pull that into their marriage of what we need to do. Well, they always hug and they always kiss, so that's what we need to do. But in my marriage, Alisa's not a kisser. Alisa's not a very touchy-feely person. And so if I were to just look at others and my friends and my buddies, and I'm like, well, why? Like, man, she's like jumping on him, like she's all over him, they're dancing. And if I were to look at that, I would never meet, in my mind, have the extraordinary marriage I desire. So Alisa and I had to work through that and go, well, what does work? And for us, it's sleeping naked and cuddling naked. It's not something that you're not going to see us post that.
Yeah.
But that is where we came to that. Pitfalls in, like your financial intimacy, credit cards. Are you on the same, do you have a cash flow plan, a budget? What's going on in that area? Spiritual intimacy, one wants to go to services, another one doesn't. One wants to listen to worship music, one doesn't. So the pitfalls are, we're not on the same page and we're not talking about it. Recreational intimacy, that's our dates, activities we do together. And that's just not even getting it on the calendar. Right? I mean, spend time, put some time on your calendar and go once a month, twice a month. We're going to carve out 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. We're doing that.
It goes back to being intentional.
Right. A lot of us aren't. We're just like, well, if it happens, it happens. Sexual intimacy, I think the big pitfall there is we believe it's always going to happen. But we never talk about it. And so it goes into a place where it doesn't. And then we're not willing to put the light back onto it. And so we get very frustrated and we'll live in sexless marriages for a long time saying nothing and being lonely. If we begin to just step out and say, hey, we need to address this. And I know what I covered for many of you may be tough to bring up. And what I would say is get yourself a marriage coach and get somebody around you to walk through some of this so you can address it. I get it. Alisa and I've gone to coaching, counseling ourselves because some of this stuff can get heavy and it can take a lot to do one-on-one. But having a professional there beside you, walk alongside you, Alisa does this with our clients day in and day out, helps them to have those breakthroughs so that they can have the tools they need in their marriage toolbox.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned the counseling and the coaching, and you've done lots of public speaking, and I'm sure men will come up to you after. You know, when men come up to you or they reach out to you, what are they asking you? Like, what are the things that you're commonly presented with?
Gosh, I wish there was a common. There's so many different things that come up. I mean, I just remember Tuesday, just even this past Tuesday morning, I was at men's prayer at my home church here at Awaken Church here in San Diego, and guy was in my prayer group and just we were talking and he's like, I'm separated. I'm like, wow, all right, man. I go, what's going on? You know, and just talking to him. And, you know, to me, it goes from there to, hey, like newlywed guys going like, dude, my wife's on her period, like, and she's like cleaning herself in the shower, and like that's freaking them out. Like that's sort of the stuff that people come up to us and tell us. I have other guys going like, hey, you know what, my wife is having like pain when we're having sex. What should I do there? You know what I mean? So I get so many different questions coming from so many different places. There isn't anything common to it because we're all in different places. And what we try to do is listen to the one family though, and hear for commonalities during certain times, and Alisa with her clients. So that way, when we do hear threes, we know it's time for an episode around that. That's been our guide over the last 12 and a half years of doing the One Extraordinary Marriage show is threes means it's time to, let's hit it. Let's do an episode on that.
Yeah, cool. And if you're listening, you're like, what's the one family? The one family,
yes,
Tony and Alisa have an amazing community that, you know, follows their podcast. Like I said, the #1 marriage podcast on Apple iTunes, and thousands, 10,000s of people listen to that. And then you have also your Facebook community, and you have your other communities where people are engaged and they're posting pictures, and it's a really involved community, you know? And so when you say the one family, that's who we're talking about, right?
Yeah. You come listen, you're a part of it. Even if you're listening to the podcast, you're part of the one family. Doesn't matter if it's podcast, Instagram, email, Facebook, wherever that may be. We really believe that. And there have been many couples who've come into our lives over the years who are part of the one family, but they're dear friends, and we really cherish who they are. And some of them have been around since the beginning. And so for us, it really is, because if we impact that one couple, what could happen? What's the effect? My kids have seen it. And even my kids at their age, they're like, yeah, like stop kissing each other, stop doing that. Like, don't talk about that stuff when we're at school or like at a game, like it's weird. And we just keep doing it because we know that we're pouring into them and they're seeing it. And we're believing that when they begin to date, get married, they're gonna be in a better spot than Alisa and I ever were. And they have parents and others around them who will be willing to speak into their life, and they can come speak to us if there's something going on. You know, that's a big thing for us, is getting people to share what's happening, letting others know what's going on instead of keeping it in the dark and away from everybody.
Yeah, awesome. I want to shift gears for a moment. You know, we're the Dads Making a Difference podcast. And one of the things we've recognized in our conversations and from the men who've reached out about, in order to make a difference in our lives, whether it's in our family or business or community, there needs to be a little bit of sacrifice or something that we turn over or give up, or maybe it's something that we take on or overcome. I'm always curious with the guys I interview and I'm speaking with, you know, in your experience, what have you either removed from your life that's made you more impactful father, or what is the hardest thing that you've had to overcome as a dad? You go either way.
Wow, I'm just trying to think, what's the thing I've removed from my life? There was a point when I was doing long distance cycling. I've been road cycling since I was 14 years old. And kids were younger, I would do double centuries. So 200 miles in a day were my big events. Wow. So my training schedule was pretty crazy. And as much as I loved it, as my son began to get older, he started football, 5th grade. And I remember putting aside my bike and my passion for what I loved, to really get to experience that with him. And I'm going to get teared up. Yeah. So I got to see that kid play from 5th grade to senior year of high school. And we got jacked because we had COVID for his senior year. So we lost pretty much a season. We only got 5 games, and he was on par to be a D1 recruit, and had blown out his ACL the year before. And you know what? I've gone back on my bike, and I ride avidly again. And even as they were growing, I got back on. I never got back to that level. It's always been, I don't know, I do maybe a 50 miler once a year, twice a year now. But I will never look back at that time and go, I gave up something, because the joy that we got to have. I mean, I love what we got to experience, and he and I mean, he'll come home, even though he's 19 now and has gone off to college, and I'm glad he's out of my house. If he comes home during the fall time, you better believe it, on a Saturday, Dad and Alex are sitting on our couch, and we're watching some college football because we love it, and we'll talk about it. And he'll come back. Last year, our high school, even though he had graduated the year prior, we had an amazing team. Last year's team, his team should have won state championship. Last year's team won a state championship. We were there for the entire thing. He came back for a number of games, was on the field. We got to celebrate. He was at the state championship game with his buddies. And we were all there just cheering and just going, you know what, we may have missed it that year because of what happened to our world. But dang it, I'll never look back and go, I lost out on something. I gained so much more. And even as of this recording coming up, we're a few days away from the opening game at Cathedral Catholic, and Alisa and I got our tickets, and you better believe we're there. We got some boys that we believe in who are seniors. We got a couple of boys who are juniors, and we're going to be there. And if I get a ride in on Sunday, I get it. If I don't, no big deal.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah.
It brings me to my next question. As you grow as a father, what is something that you've committed to or that you're excited about right now?
Right now, I'm 49 years old, and I took the step about a month ago to really hone in on my wellness. I'm physically fit. I feel like if you were to see me, you wouldn't be like, oh, wow, well, Tony looks overweight or anything of that nature. But I have been dealing with some just fatigue, some frustrating weight loss and weight gain, and just this fluctuation and energy going high, low. And so I've really, right now, as I look at my 6 pillars of intimacy, I feel like for me to really strengthen them, I really need to address some of what's going on with me physically, because ultimately by doing that, I'm going to be able to look at all of my pillars with Alisa and be able to address some of them that have cracks. And why they have cracks is because I'm just not in a good spot, and just working through that right now. So that's where I am in that personal level. From a business level with One Extraordinary Marriage, we're believing like we're growing in many ways, so that way we can sell as many books and get in as many couples as we believe we can, because there needs to be a shift. And we believe that this book will be the next book in the marriage world that's going to shift a generation. And so I put my heart and soul in each and every day to do that.
Yeah, amazing. And when we're looking at the book, you posted on your social media the other day how, the 6 pillars of intimacy is in second all time right now behind in sale, right? Behind a book that's been around for 30 years.
Yeah, at that point in time, yeah, up on Amazon, we were the number 2 book in the Christian marriage against an amazing book that everybody knows. We love Dr. Chapman and what he has done, but it is time for it's time for the next generation. It's time for something new and for people to be able, and couples specifically, to come around this and go, that's our framework, that's what we're doing, and that's what's going to transform our marriage so we can have the breakthrough and the extraordinary marriage we desire.
Amazing. We'll make sure that everyone check out the show notes. We're going to post exactly where you can pick up this book. If someone wants to get in contact with you, Tony, or in contact with Alisa, or the both of you, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, best place, oneextraordinarymarriage.com. That will have everything there. For those of you who are massive podcast listeners on your favorite podcast app, we can say that now because 12 and a half years ago when we started, we didn't have that. Yeah. But on your favorite podcast app, literally, just type in One Extraordinary Marriage Show. It will show up. You will not miss it. There's over 700 episodes. Start scrolling through, start listening, jump in. And we're excited to have you along and part of the One family and be a part of your journey.
Amazing. Well, Tony, thank you so much, brother. Appreciate you. Thanks for taking the time out of your day with your family to be here with us. And I'm wishing you and Alisa all the best on the book as it's moving forward with your launch, and it's the word spreads, and of course with your podcast and with your beautiful family.
Thanks, Cam. I really appreciate it. And to all of you who have been listening, thank you for giving me some time to speak into you, and I'm excited for what's ahead. Thank you.